Ladies and gents, boys and girls, it is class time. Follow in real time on Television Jamaica's YouTube channel or on onespotmedia.com. We are also live on Music 99 and gojamaica.com. And as usual, you can use the various social media platforms for questions or comments. Today we have Cape Economics and CSEC Geography, but first, we start with information technology. I'm your teacher, Leo Lewis, and today's topic is computer applications and specifications. So we need to pay attention now to what we're talking about when we're talking about using computers. And the idea is that computers can be used in any particular sphere, any particular field, but you have to pay attention to what you intend to use it for and what are the needs that you might particularly have for your particular scenario. So today we'll be looking at some applications of IT and of course looking at some specifications. So where can we pay attention to for this particular section of our lesson? Well, your syllabus in section 1, specific objective 9, focuses on the basic needs that an application might have for use of computers. And there are several listed in your syllabus, and we're going to just skip through a couple of them real quickly to introduce what we're going through. And then in section 3, and specification objective 3, or should I say 6, there is information on what we'll use computers for and how we want them to be used. Your previous knowledge, of course, comes from your section 1, where we have hardware, software, and of course you need to remember those things, the different types of hardware, the different types of software. And if, well, you're fourth formers, or we assume that you're fourth formers or fifth formers. So the idea is that you need to understand or remember what input devices are, or the types of input devices. And of course your teachers might have gone through a number of them already. Your data entry would have to be coming from keying devices or pointing devices, or some source data automation, or some might call it direct data entry. So you need to remember those input devices. You need to remember about also your output devices, which are of course printers mostly, your impact, your non-impact, and then processing. Processing of course has to deal with your processor essentially though. But just to remind you that when we talk about processing, there are other devices in your computer that handle processing jobs as well, to offload some of the work that the processor has to do. So try to remember that as well. All right. And then also you need to remember what software is, you know, the types of software, system software, application software, the types of system software, etc. All right. So if we're going to look at these different applications of computers, we need to remember what hardware devices are, what software devices are, how we use them. So, how are they used? Well, they're used in an entertainment sector. And for those of you who are music aficionados, you might already have an understanding of as to how IT is used in music. We can, of course, think about it from the perspective of creating the music, or promoting it, or even selling it. Most of us, regardless of who we are and what instrument we play, we might even play an instrument into the computer that records it. All right? And then we have gaming and movies. How your gaming industry works. I love doing this most of the time, but with your gaming industry, there's a technology called mocap, or motion capture, which basically captures how an actor interacts with other actors, and of course paint in their own character there. Just a case in point, that mocap is also used in movies. And the idea of motion capture is basically where an individual is strapped on with motion sensors, and then sometimes, most of the times, there is a camera positioned in front of the person to get their facial expression as well. The most common, or the most familiar one is the motion capture that occurred with Lord of the Rings and the Smeagol character. Yes, that diabolic character. And then, of course, there's motion capture in Hobbit Steel, I think it is, where, you know, I think it was Cumberbatch who did the dragon and all of that. So that motion capture is basically something that takes place on computers. So as the person moves and their gestures, their facial features, that is captured on computers as well. And of course, you can imagine the kind of processing power needed for something like this. Other industries, law enforcement. Well, this hasn't catched on to Jamaica that much as yet, but hopefully in time it will, where we see our police officers having mobile devices where they can check records of persons while on the road. For now, we are doing a lot of these things manually, but having a mobile device that is connected to some database somewhere helps with the information retrieval and information storage. All right? And then we have control centers, and there might be many other things involved, but we want to pay attention to just these two for now. So with your control center, basically there are operators there paying attention to the feeds coming in from cameras all over the country or all over a particular city. And that helps with the idea of law enforcement. Because of course, we must admit that we're not in a perfect world. So we need to control a lot of the things that are going on around us. All right? And then business. For those of you who are doing CAPE IT, you might be looking at different types of information systems. All right? And those information systems tend to border around the idea of the IT tools taking preeminence in a lot of the decision making. And so you might hear about decision support systems, transaction processing systems, all right? And in businesses, these different systems are used to get information to managers and to people who need the information so that they can make the kinds of decisions to make the business grow. There's one other one that I had to add called delivery. It was just the other day I read in the news where there was a particular pizza place that was delivering pizzas using drones, and the FAA had to stop them because, of course, it would be chaos if there are a lot of drones in the air and they are not registered. People just are flying their drones to deliver their food. But it does happen. And, of course, the FAA had to put a stop to it, and we know how that goes. But also, there are other methods of delivery. You might find that some couriers in Jamaica walking around with a tablet, and of course you have to sign that tablet whenever they make a delivery. All right. Medicine. This is one area that I think that we are slowly getting into the rhythm with. I believe that honestly there are a lot of different things going on in medicine where that is concerned, but I think most of the times we are not paying attention to the technology that's out there. For now, we've been using a lot of patient databases where basically you come into the hospital or wherever you go into and your information is recorded. But there are expert systems out there and that we can use or we can even begin to think about using. But there are other things that we use IT for in medicine, and sometimes it tends to deal with the idea of just imaging and, of course, radiation therapy, etc. But there's a lot more that we can explore. Of course, being a third world country, we might take a while to catch up, but I think we'll get there. And then, of course, students using computers at home, doing your assignments, PowerPoint, doing word processing, all these different things, doing your research. You have to use computers in this very same way. A lot of my students, after talking with them, I find that some of them don't really like the idea because they don't feel connected to the teacher or connected to their friends as much, especially when it comes to a Zoom meeting or meet on Google. But it's an arena that we really need to pay attention to how we can enhance, but it's there for now. And I just believe that we can use it with the great capabilities that it has. There was one particular meme that a friend of mine was showing me just this morning, and we were showing that a teacher, while in the classroom with the students, basically telling the students to be quiet because the students weren't quiet. And now that they're online, we're begging them to interact with us because of what we're doing. All right? But we are using the technology for these different types of things. And we, of course, need to pay attention to what specifications we're working with. And it all depends on our needs and where we are at. Now, I'm not much of a business student, but and I guess the teacher coming on teaching economics can shed some light. But in every industry, there are different stages where we go ahead and we more or less a product is made. There's a planning stage, there's a production stage, and all these stages, of course, come together to form the industry or to create products for an industry. And at every level, we can identify where computers can be used. Case in point, if we're looking at music, I was watching a video just the other day where I saw a number of, well, I saw one particular musician who was basically writing his lyrics in the computer just to, of course, save whatever his thoughts were, and then he went into the recording studio just to record and was watching the laptop or whatever. There was another video I was watching where there were a number of musicians on a train, busking on the train, and they were using keyboard on their iPhones, a bass player on their iPhone, a drum set on their iPhone. So there are all these kind of things that can go on. And of course, production stage, where you're basically producing the music, and most of us will who are lovers of music would possibly see all this information coming on, that we have people in the studio doing a mix or listening to some kind of a mix just to get the right music coming out. Then the whole thing of packaging. Pictures need to be taken, all right? Videos need to be created just to get the music out there. And promotion, delivery, consumption, all these stages in some way can be impacted by computers. But because they can be impacted by computers, the needs at each stage might be different. The need for planning or the need at the planning stage might be very different from the need of the production stage. You can plan just on your phone, but when it's time to produce, completely different thing. You might need better computer power or better processing power. All right, so it's time for our scheduled break. Stretch your legs, get some water and some fruit, but come right back. We have more to cover.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Welcome back, welcome back. If you're just joining us, we've been discussing computer applications and specifications. Let's continue. So we were talking about how we look at computers and their applications. Where do we use them? And it all boils down to one thing. Well, one thing. What do you want a computer for? What are you going to use it for? And this is where we start now to think about, okay, if I have this kind of need, what kind of device will fulfill this need? If I have this job to do, what kind of device can fulfill that job? And here is where the nerds take over. We tend to look at computers based on their specifications. And these specifications may seem daunting to begin with. But, of course, we'll go through a couple of them and you'll be just fine. How do we define specifications? Well, we just can call them the details for each component of your computer. And if you decide now to do a particular job, there are going to be many computers out there which are more than capable. So it is going to boil down to your need or your job. Eventually, it comes down to your pocket as well, but I'm sure you can find machines that can satisfy your need. So let's look at one particular specification. The first thing we see in this specification is a 6.5-inch OLED, I should say. And this has to do with the screen technology and the dimensions of that particular device. Now, I could go into the whole issue of what OLED really is, but you might need to know a little bit of it. So OLED actually stands for Organic Light Emitting Diode. And it simply means that there are some cells between two plates that when you pass current through them, they change color. All right, that's essentially what it is. You don't need to go into the details right now unless you're possibly studying CAPE computer science and then possibly if you move on to com science at university. All right, and then we also see the resolution of the screen. And this resolution comes at 2688 by 1242. Now that is pretty high in our arena. And I think it is called retina display in some respect. And then we see this 458 pixels per inch. And we're going to discuss some of that a little bit later. And your resolution, of course, is dependent on these small pixels, or what we have shortened to call pixels. So they're actually picture elements. And if we have 458 of them in 1 inch, you can imagine the resolution that we're talking about. All right? And just to show you quickly what we mean. Every inch, measured whether horizontally or vertically, will have 458. If you're looking at our screen here now, you will see where we have a 10 ppi or 10 pixels per inch, where we see 10 different squares in 1 inch or 2.54 centimeters. And then we have another image where we have 20 pixels per inch. And that means 20 different squares or 20 small squares inside of that 1 inch length. And as you can see, the images are markedly different. The one on the left that has a 10 pixels per inch is not as defined as the one on the right. So if we had 458 in an inch, that means the picture would be much more refined and, of course, much more detailed. That means we can place color differences at smaller intervals, thus making everything more refined. I told you, the nerds take over from this point on. So let's do the calculation a little bit to see what we're working with. And from this, you might be able, of course, to find out what the device is. So first, we start with the pixels, or the resolution. 2688 by 1242 squared pixels, right? And then we're told we have 458 pixels per inch. Now we're going to divide, by this 458, and it will give us a particular length or width that we're working with. So we divide 2688 by 485 or 458 and we get 5.86 inches. If we divide the other value, 1242 by 458, we get 2.71 inches. Now some of you might already know where I'm going with this, but run with me. And then we're going to add the sums of these squares, which would give us 416,837. And when we find the square root of that using Pythagoras' theorem, we get 6.456, which is also close enough to 6.5 as we saw earlier from our specification. So what are we talking about? We're talking about this device called the iPhone 11 Pro Max. So immediately as you see these specifications, you can think, okay, this looks like a phone. So if you get this on an exam or you get these specifications on an exam, this is the information that you need to pick out in order to identify, okay, what could this be? Is this a laptop? Is this a server? Is this just another phone? So when you use this information, that definitely will drive you down the right path. And then we have a Face ID, which seems more like a biometric way of you entering the phone. And many of these phones already come with that kind of technology. And of course, fingerprint scanners, which are basically biometric devices that will recognize you. Of course, even though I'm an IT professional, I really don't like the idea of this thing reading my face. But hey, to each his own. And we look at the camera associated with this particular Face ID. And if we look at the camera carefully, we can see where our camera is saying the front camera is 12 megapixels, and mega means 1 million. Now, I don't know what these guys were thinking, but when you can get 12 million pixels from a device that small, that technology is beyond unbelievable. So 12 million pixel camera, which actually amounts to about 1200 by 900 in terms of resolution. So any particular picture you take will have this kind of a resolution, 1200 by 900. So sometimes you'll be thinking, you know, you have a phone and you take a picture, and by the time you take your picture look really fuzzy, and then you see somebody else's picture and you're like, wow, you know, where, how? Has to do with the resolution of that camera, that megapixel. That's what drives the whole technology behind it. But even worse with this phone, at the back of the phone, there are 3 cameras of the same resolution. And those of you who are photophiles and might, of course, have seen this already, each of those lenses has different focus lengths. And I guess some of the cameramen in here will know what that is about. Different focus lengths, different apertures, and all of that. Whether or not it's a wide lens, each and every one of them have different kind of specifications that you, of course, can go through later on. And some other things that you might be familiar with, memory capacity, which we're talking about is RAM, of course, and then storage capacity. Now, one of the things that we need to pay attention to, especially if you get an exam, if you see gigabytes or megabytes somewhere, it doesn't mean that that's the memory or the storage capacity, or it doesn't mean that it's the hard disk or the solid state drive. That's not what it means. You have to read the specifications, and in order for you to even think about or get a true idea of what it is. Because I've seen students already answered some questions and they're asking, you know, what's the size of memory? And they wrote down 512 gigabytes. And I'm like, you did not read the specifications, because I'm sure you would have seen the RAM beside the 6 gigabits or something like that. You have to read the specifications right through. Don't just guess because, oh, you say gigabytes there, that must be the memory. No, that's not true. In this case, we're seeing 6 gigabytes of RAM, and we're seeing up to 512 gigabytes. And this, of course, larger one is going to specify the actual storage capacity. Let's look at another machine right quickly. We're seeing, and we're going to try to guess it. We're seeing AMD Ryzen 9 3950X. This is a whole heap. 16 core, 64 megabit L3 cache, max boost clock, 4.7 gigahertz. Then we're seeing another piece of specification, 64 gigabit dual channel HyperX Fury DDR4 XMP at 3200 megahertz. Now that is a mouthful, I can understand, but then there is something that comes now that is much more familiar. Windows 10 Home 64-bit English. That already we can possibly recognize. Everybody knows Windows. Well, almost everybody. Then we have a 2 TB M.2 PCIe NVMe SSD. And yes, it can be overwhelming, but don't worry, we're going to go through it. 2 TB 7200 RPM SATA. 6 gigabits per second storage. And of course, the storage gave everything away, so to speak. And then we see at NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3090 24 gigabit GDDR6X. Now you might be saying, this man has lost his nut. What on earth is this? And that's a good question. But let's look at each and every specification first. First, we have the processor. And that was the first specification in the table. An AMD Ryzen 9. All right? So we can identify the manufacturer right away. AMD. All right? There are other manufacturers other than Intel. And then we have the model, which is the Ryzen 9 3950, and the amount of cores, which is 16. Now, this core measurement actually means that there are 16 small processors inside that one processor. If you saw core 32, it could mean that one processor has 16 or two processors, or sorry, if you saw core 32, you could say that one processor had 32 different cores or two processors with 16. I think it's the Mac Pro, if my memory serves me right, the Mac Pro, not the MacBook Pro, or the Mac Pro, the large server-like Mac machine, has about 48 cores, if I'm not mistaken. So there are about 4 or 5 different processors, or they tend to fill their machines with processors, especially when they need to do certain types of jobs. All right? And then we have cache levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. Now you might be acquainted with cache, with the fact that you might be using your phone and you might get an option to clear cache or something like that. Well, with this particular processor, there are 3 levels of cache, each one leading to the other. So everything is loaded into cache 3 or L3, then into L2, then L1. And L1 is the highest one. L1 resides inside the processor, and I think to some degree L2 as well. And then the cache size of 64 megabytes, 4 megabytes, which means that it can store 64 megabytes at any one time. All right? And the processor boost, this is where now we talk about the processor speed. That boost simply means that if you boost the processor, it can go to 4.75 gigahertz. All right? And a gigahertz is basically a measure per second. And I'm not going to go into the math with that because that's another whole physics class altogether. All right? Note, if you get a question in the exam, you need to answer the question as you are asked. The question might ask you, how many cores, or what is the model, or who's the manufacturer? I've seen students see a question of that nature and asking who's the manufacturer, and they write out the entire line of the specification. Now, in my class, if I saw that, that is wrong, of course, right? Just because the answer is inside the answer you gave doesn't make your answer wrong. When you do that, it seems to me that you don't understand what you did. And so to understand what you're doing, you need to pay attention much more closely to what the specifications are saying. So if you get a question that asks you, what's the size of cache? Don't just write down some memory capacity. Read through it. Take your time to read through it and identify what you think you understand. And then eliminate those things if you're not sure what the answer is. Then we have the memory, which here is about 64 gigabytes, dual channel HyperX. And of course, the manufacturer is HyperX. The model, Fury. And the speed, 3200 megahertz. This 3200 megahertz is almost synonymous with the double data rate or double data rate 4th generation. So anytime you see a double data rate 4th generation, it tends to mean that we're working with about 3200 megahertz. And again, I won't go into that physics right now. All right. So this DDR4 is what we call the 4th generation, simply because one, it is much faster, and there are others coming beyond DDR4, as we will see later on. This memory or this particular NVIDIA device is actually the video card. And we know the manufacturer is NVIDIA. GeForce is the model. The capacity, yes, 24 gigabytes. And yes, your memory, there is memory on most of these video cards. Why? We'll see later, but keep the suspense for now. And then, of course, the memory tech, we're seeing the DDR6X there, meaning that it's much faster than 4. And of course, there are specifications on the web that you can look up. But for your purpose, you don't need to know all of that. But just to give you, those of you who are nerds and geeks like myself, 84 gigabits per second will run on something like that. All right. Then, of course, the Windows 10 that we all know, Home Edition, 64-bit. Just one note here, the 64-bit represents the amount of words, or the size, I should say, of the word. And a word is actually an instruction. And the size of an instruction, 64 bits, meaning that your computer can handle a larger amount of data over time. And that's simply what that means. Because there are different types of instructions, and those of you who do computer science will know there are RISC and CISC, and you can, of course, program a computer to work with a kind of instruction set. And the RISC and CISC has to do with reduced instruction set or complex instruction sets, which basically tells you that, hey, this computer, if given a complex instruction, can handle it based on a 64-bit measurement, all right? Or the instruction itself is 64-bit. So this is the monstrosity that we just described. It's Alienware, and Alienware is made by Dell. I think, well, Alienware is owned by Dell. And it's a gaming PC. And as I said before, if you're a gamer, then this might very well be the way to go. However, I'm not sure how many of your students are gamers and would want to go this route, because this US $1,100 is not that nice. And of course, this would not be the actual price by the time it reaches Jamaica, because you have to handle shipping and all these things. So if you're going to spend $150,000 just to buy it and then find the money to ship it, I think you should spend that money on your education. All right, because this is for people who basically make a living of gaming. With that said, I remember there was this particular news article where this father was dancing because his son won $3 million off of gaming, and $3 million US. So I'm not sure. Maybe you want to be a gamer later on. You plan your route and make sure that you can eat as long as you're gaming. All right. Let's move to something that is a little bit more speedy, I could say. The Lenovo ThinkPad, a simple laptop, but pretty good nonetheless. We have the different specification. This is the processor with the different amount of cache. But notice here, we have the cache being mentioned, and it seems to be a much, much smaller than what was at the phone earlier. But this is L3, and we will look at that when we are closing off. And then we have the front side bus, meaning the bus speed that comes from that processor, or that processor works with a front side bus speed of 1600 megahertz. And then Windows Professional 7, of course, or Windows 7 Professional, not Windows 10, but not bad either. And then we see where we have 16 gigabits of DDR3, and that's RAM, that's memory. As usual with many different laptops, you will get a measurement that would measure the length, width, and the depth. This depth is 1.18 108 inches. And I think for a laptop, that's pretty okay. But some of us already know that, you know, you might have the MacBook Air that is possibly, you know, possibly 0.03 inches or thereabout. All right. And then we have a 180 gigs of solid state, a solid state drive. Now, if you had 180 gigs of hard drive, that would be okay, so to speak, for some kinds of jobs. But many laptops come with much more than that. The difference is, though, the solid state drive tends to be more expensive because, one, it tends to be more durable, much faster than your hard drives, of course. And solid state simply means that it's electronics, all right, not moving disk. So that's what solid state means. And then we have 4.0 HD, and that has to do with the dimensions of your screen. And we measure the dimensions diagonally, remember that, please. And the resolution here, surprisingly, 1366 by 768. And that is much smaller than the phone. That is surprising, isn't it? And then we have a 720p HD camera with face tracking, again, face tracking. But the 720p here speaks to the resolution of your camera. And that 720p tends to mean 1280 by 720. Of course, there are cameras much better than that. And then we have VGA connections, and your VGA connection would be on the outside, which you can basically use to connect to a projector. And two USB 3s and USB 2 and one USB or always on USB, which means that there's always power there. So you can plug in your devices there and, you know, it will provide you with power. Smart card reader, etc. So these are basically your specifications for your laptop. Ethernet RJ45 jack. For those of you who don't know it, it looks a little bit like the phone line, but just look at a little bit thicker jack at the end that you'd plug your Ethernet cord in, and then inland style 6-row keyboard, and that just speaks to your keyboard, of course, and then the wireless technology behind it. So let's quickly look at a comparison of the processor for this device or these devices, just to really make a measurement and see how they really look. So the speed of your iPhone Pro Max is 2.65 and 1.8 gigahertz. Now, why do I have two different measurements? Well, your iPhone Pro Max actually is what we call a hexacore, and it means that there are about 6 cores. One processor having 4 cores or 4 small processors, and another one having 2. All right, and of course the cache size is 8 megabytes, but just L2, which is not bad for a phone. I think it's pretty good for a phone, and your phone could possibly do much more than some of these laptops that we have nowadays. Your Lenovo ThinkPad, however, the speed is 2.90 gigahertz, and this measurement has to do overall, so to speak, but we're seeing that this particular one has 7 cores inside of it, all right? And that's why we have i7. I think I'm not sure, but I think the generation might have moved on beyond i7. So we should have we have i3, i5, i7, and then we might have much more. I'm not sure yet, don't quote me on it, but here's the deal. If we are using i7 now, there is no doubt that we have a ton more things to go. And here we have Alienware having 4.75 gigahertz, 16 cores, L3 cache, 64 megabytes of cache. Listen, you have to use computers based on your need, not based on, well, some want to do it based on bragging rights, but, you know, irrespective of the situation, you need to know what your specifications are. That is it for today's lesson. Be sure to do some practice, work on your own, and remember, you can send your questions at any time to Television Jamaica's Facebook page at Television Jamaica or Instagram at Television_Jamaica, or use the hashtag TVJ Class Time. Stay tuned. CXC Geography after the break.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
It's here. Interactive classes for all ages on the School Time channel on onespotmedia.com. With a combination of live Zoom classes and recorded class time, Schools Not Out lessons, and numerous educational content, we've created a comprehensive 24-hour channel dedicated exclusively to educating our nation's youth. Early childhood through to primary, secondary, and tertiary, it's one stop on one spot for education 24 hours. Brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in association with Television Jamaica Limited.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Welcome back to class time. We move now to CSEC Geography. I am Clarine McFarlane, and today's lesson will focus on tourism. Let's get into it. We'll start today with a trivia, just to recall what you have done in your previous geography classes. It says, which of the following is classified as a tertiary industry? Is it A, fishing, B, tourism, C, oil refinery, or D, food processing? I'll give you a second to choose your answer. If you selected tourism as your answer, you are correct. All right? We're now going into the lesson. We'll be looking at tourism as a tertiary economic activity. Your previous geography lesson will have you look at food processing as a secondary industry and fishing or farming as a primary economic activity. The objectives to be covered include defining key terms relating to tourism as a tertiary economic activity, explaining the factors which influence the development and growth of the industry in the Caribbean. And we're also going to look at some of the benefits and challenges of tourism in the Caribbean. What is tourism? Tourism is a business. It is an activity. It is a product. Not necessarily a tangible product, but being a service, it is also a product in the processes that are involved for it to be offered. Tourism is an experience which involves the movement of people for leisure for a limited time. It is also an act where persons are in pursuit of an experience. In that, as an industry, it caters to the recreation and leisure activities of people who travel within the country or they are traveling outside of their own region. Looking at the Caribbean region, we want to know where our tourists are coming from. I want you to look on my flow map. You will see some arrows and some numbers. Now the arrows are indicating by their size the direction or the movement of the people where they are coming from. So we have the Caribbean region, we have the United States being represented here, we have Canada represented here, and we also have Europe representing here. Majority of our visitors who are coming into the Caribbean region, they are coming from those main regions. That's North America, to include North America and Canada, which sits on the same continent, and Europe. We also have visitors coming into the Caribbean region from the south. These persons will more so find them in countries such as Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. We call them the ABC Islands. These islands will attract visitors from South American continent as well as those of the Caribbean region. How do they get here? Tourists come into the Caribbean region two main modes. They travel by aircraft or they will travel by cruise ships. Now, these aircrafts and cruise ships that are coming in, they stop at ports. So, of course, we have ports in the main resort towns to include Montego Bay, Falmouth in Trelawney, Ocho Rios in St. Anne, and Port Royal in Kingston as well. And of course, we have two major international airports in Jamaica, which are the Santos International Airport in Montego Bay, St. James, and the Norman Manley Airport in Kingston. And of course, other Caribbean countries will have their own ports as well. I know you are familiar with these, so just put that in memory. So we look at where the tourists are coming from. We look at who the tourists are. Now we're going to look at why the tourists come into the Caribbean region. If you are a tourist coming from Europe, North America, or even Canada, what are some of the reasons you would want to come into the Caribbean region? We start by looking at the physical factors. And the physical factors would include the spectacular beaches. Some of these beaches are white sandy beaches. Some of these beaches are black sandy beaches, depending on where they are located. Clear waters, coral reefs, rainforests, waterfalls, and we also boast in the Caribbean unique limestone features, none other that is experienced in the world. We spoke about the ports just now. The ports speak to accessibility. Where we are located in the Caribbean region, we are strategically located just close enough to the equator, just a little distance south of North America. And so it is cheaper and also time effective for these visitors who are coming into the region than for them to go other places in the world. I just mentioned our location and its accessibility. We can also look from there the climate. Jamaica, well, not just Jamaica, but the Caribbean region, we are located in the tropics, and so we experience a tropical marine climate, which is warm all year round, and as such, during winter periods, the snowbirds will come in order to relax and have fun in the different activities that we will afford them. We also speak of the culture and heritage that we have in the Caribbean region. It is rich, diverse, and is influenced by the different ethnic groups that we have on our islands. We speak of ethnic groups such as the Africans. We also have the Indians. We have the blacks, just to name a few. And together, the lifestyle and tradition of these ethnic groups will form a unique culture in the Caribbean. And it would include activities such as culinary practices, the way we celebrate, how we dance, how we sing, how we talk, to give our tourists a unique, a spectacular experience while they are here. We can't talk about the culture without mentioning the people. Tourism is a service industry, and the people are core to the production of what we have to offer. Caribbean nationals are believed to be very creative and friendly. And as such, the service industry, it relies on the population to encourage our visitors to feel welcome while they come. Especially persons who work in the tourist sector or in hotels, they have their own unique way of making their visitors welcome, feeling safe, feeling at home. The political climate also influences visitors coming into the Caribbean region. I would want to say, or safe to say, in the Caribbean region, it is quite politically stable. We don't have much wars or riots. The government systems that are there are quite democratic and involved in the production of tourism as a business and as a product. Other reasons for tourists coming to the Caribbean would also include government support. Most Caribbean islands will have a ministry or an office with direct responsibility for the affairs of tourism, the production, as well as product development and growth of tourists. We speak of ministries of tourism and tourism boards, which their offices are represented in North America or these countries from which the tourists are coming from. Especially when they'll have global events, you find that our ministers are there representing, selling our country, marketing what we have to offer to our visitors. With all of these factors contributing to the reason for tourists coming into Jamaica, safe to say that the Caribbean, or not just Jamaica, but the Caribbean, safe to say that the Caribbean is indeed paradise. We are next to none. What we offer is quite rich, is quite exotic, and we'll find this experience nowhere else in the world. And that will take us to our next trivia question to see how best you were listening to what we would have covered so far. The question says, which of the following exerts the greatest influence on tourism in the Caribbean? And note the word greatest is highlighted. The options include climate, carnival, coral reefs, tropical forests. Which of these exerts the greatest influence on tourism in the Caribbean? Is it A, carnival? Is it B, climate? C, coral reef? Or is it tropical forest? I give you a second to find your answer. If your answer is B, yes, you are correct. And why is climate the greatest influence? The climate of the Caribbean remains warm because it is close to the equator. We benefit from the sunshine right throughout the year, and it is quite an experience for snowbirds that are coming from extreme temperatures from North America or from the South American continent at different points or in winter periods in their region. All right, so moving from our trivia question, we're now going to take a look at some of the types of tourism. I want you to pay close attention. When you're through watching, I'm going to ask you to recall the person who gets the most correct. I have a treat for you. So pay close attention to the video that you're going to see, which captures the types of tourism. All right. So there were 8 types of tourism that were highlighted. How many do you remember? I hear that one. All right, Tom, go ahead. That's adventure tourism, good for those persons who like the risky business, the hiking and the skydiving and the whole adrenaline rush. Yes, adventure tourism. Are there any other? Can you remember any other? I'm hearing cultural tourism, very good. And that would involve? Okay, fair enough. That would involve persons learning the history and the way of life of different people of a different place, good. We have religious tourism, good. These are for persons such as our theologians or pastors, those who are in ministry. They are spiritually connected, very good. Medical tourism, excellent. So persons will go, give me a name of a Caribbean country that will facilitate this type of tourism. Cuba, excellent stuff, excellent. Then we have ecotourism. Ecotourism, what would that suggest? Being engaged with the environment, being in one with the nature. Persons are so enthused. So for those persons who would like hiking, those who will go to the caves to see what it is like will engage in ecotourism. Then we have business tourism. And these are persons who are traveling for work purposes. And we look at that, well, your slide would have, the video that you just watched would have been keen to the details of business tourism. So these persons are not there to have fun, but they are there for work. They are earning while they are away from their workplace, while they are away from home. We also have sports tourism, and this would also engage athletes, as well as those who are enthused by different sporting activities. Can you name me one popular sport that will also attract tourists or visitors going to different countries or coming to the Caribbean region? I hear somebody saying football, very good example. Are there any other sporting activities? Track is another example, good stuff. Swimming is another example, thank you. There's agro-tourism. What would that one involve? Yes, the good old farming, yes. The planting of dasheen, learning different techniques of farming. And of course, there's a new business where agriculture is concerned, which involves the use of technology. So that is also booming in that regard. Can you think of any other types of tourism that were not mentioned in the video? Culinary tourism, yes, it forms part of culture, but it can be seen independently. Very good. Educational tourism, excellent for those persons who are studying and the features of their study are elsewhere, away from home, away from school. In fact, tourism in the Caribbean is big business. And when I talk about big business, let's look at the numbers. So international arrivals, and we're talking about globally now, between 2015 and 2019, you would have realized that there is a steady increase in terms of the number of visitors who are going to different destinations. So we're talking about the arrivals of tourists in a particular area, someplace new. They are going there for an experience. So this is statistics that would have been gathered from the World Tourism Organization in terms of the specific, how many people, and we're talking about millions here. We're not talking about 100,000, we're talking about millions of people who are traveling throughout the entire year. In the Caribbean, the statistics is not the same, it's quite steady because we have some rich resources, we have some reasons. Remember, look at some of the reasons why tourists would want to come into the Caribbean. And as such, year after year, even though there's a steady increase over the years, we can safe to say that the Caribbean is a tourist destination. We can also look at the visitors' arrival in Jamaica, and this is between 1980 and 2019. And if you look closely at the line graph, it is showing an increase from 1980. So there is a dip here at 1985, but it picks up again and starts to go up in 1987, where it suddenly falls in 1988. But let us look at the latter end of our line graph into the 2000s. Between 2000 to 2019, the increase has been steady over the years. And had it not been for the pandemic, I'm sure we'll be going on fine in terms of our numbers increasing. We can also look at the stages at which the numbers change for cruise. It is a little bit different because at different points, you will have variation of high numbers and low numbers. So we see that as a fluctuation between 1999 and let's say 2014. So there's some amount of grade up and down, which suggests that the fluctuation or the numbers would have changed. We can also look at the money that the visitors come in and spend with us when they come into the Caribbean region. They earn big bucks. So over the years between 2010 and 2019, the numbers have been increasing, especially because we have new activities or we have new niche markets or new focus for our visitors who are traveling in the region. And as such, they have different activities to be engaged in, and they are going to pay to be engaged in these activities. We also look at support activities, those that support or linkages, those that support or those that rely on the tourism industry in order to earn their money. We'll look at that in a little while. Having realized that tourism is big business for the Caribbean region, let us now look at tourism in Barbados. And this is just a short case in terms of what is being offered in Barbados. So we'll look at why visitors will come to the Caribbean region. So let us put those factors into perspective. So highlighted is a map of Barbados, and I want you to pay attention to the key. The areas that are highlighted blue are showing the main urban area of Barbados, and that would be Bridgetown. Those areas that are highlighted orange would be the main tourist areas. We refer to them as resort towns or the resort areas. Those that are highlighted pink, which is just this small dot in Bridgetown, is where you'll have shopping villages, historic sites, sporting facilities such as the Oval Park. The Oval Park is used for which sport again? Chris Gale is of what sport? Good. Cricket, good, right? And we also have ports for ships to dock here. So notice we also have an airport. Remember, we talk about accessibility. Good. So the airport will facilitate that. There are natural attractions in Barbados, which would include well-maintained beaches and limestone features such as the Harrison Cave and Welchman Hall Gully. These are developed and well-maintained to support the tourism industry in Barbados. We already spoke of accessibility, having access to ports such as cruise ship ports, as well as the airport to facilitate travel from North American countries. And because of where Barbados is concerned, we can also include South American countries as well. Other reasons why persons would want to visit Barbados or to be a tourist in Barbados is the Crop Over Festival. The Crop Over Festival in Barbados marks the beginning of harvest. This event, it attracts thousands of visitors on a yearly basis to celebrate. We have there are historic parks and buildings that are maintained, meaning they scrub down the walls of these edifices, these buildings, because they mark historic milestone of Barbados. These buildings or these parks are well preserved and they are restored at different points. They are maintained frequently in order for them to look nice when we go there to look at them. Sports such as fishing, golf, Richmond sport, tennis, cricket, each year will bring thousands of people to Barbados just to watch, or those who are participating in these sporting activities. We're still on the factors that are attracting persons into Barbados. We speak of accommodation. In Barbados, just like Jamaica, you have different forms of accommodation to suit your economic lifestyle. So you have the option of staying at an Airbnb, you have the option of staying at a villa, you have the option to stay at a 5-class, 4-class, or even 10-class hotel if you choose and you have the money. And the trick about this, many of them are locally owned by the locals of Barbados. We also have other businesses that are supported by tourism industry and are supporting the tourism industry. We speak of activities such as transportation. So those persons who have established car rentals, those persons who operate taxis to move the visitors from their hotels or from their point of stay to the different attractions. We speak of bars and restaurants where they can have authentic food to the tradition and culture of Barbados. We also have duty-free shops and nightclubs. When you're on a vacation, who don't want to let down your hair and have fun, of course, and have a party from time to time? Those are also afforded. Examples would include Old Town and St. Lawrence Gap, which are lively and attractive. Now, in Jamaica, can you name me one place, one location that is as lively and as attractive as those that were mentioned here? I give you a hint. Think Mobe. The Hips trick is correct. So those persons are most visitors when they come to Montego Bay, for example, they hear about the hip strip and the different offerings that are there for them to keep them occupied while they are at stay. There's also government support in Barbados. So remember, I mentioned that most Caribbean islands, they have a specific ministry, a specific portfolio for the tourism activity. They are responsible for the planning and development of the tourist product that is being offered in the country. So Barbados have their very own Barbados Tourism Authority, and there is the Hospitality Institute that supports the marketing and development of this product. It is by this the government takes responsibility for the maintenance of the infrastructures that are put in place to build the tourism industry in Barbados. This would include airports, seaports, the roads that will lead in and out of the resort towns and areas where tourists are accommodated. The government also takes responsibility to promote events that are offered on the island. They are also responsible for educating people about the offerings that are there on the island, as well as training persons to partake in the tourism industry. So now that we have looked at Barbados, we now look at Trinidad and Tobago. What is tourism like in Trinidad and Tobago? In Trinidad and Tobago, or Trinidad being the parent country of both, or the twin republic as we would call them, it's not the typical tourism destination. This means it is not about the leisure as we would know it or just to relax as we know it. They are more so focused on business. So majority of the persons who are going to Trinidad are going there for business ventures. They may be going there for work conferences or meetings. If for any reason they will go to Trinidad and Tobago as a state, they would more so go to Tobago for leisure activities. You have persons going to Trinidad or to visit their family and friends. And this accounts for the largest group of tourists that are going on the island. So of course, instead of staying in hotels most of the time, they will stay with their families or their friends. And some of us, when we travel to some first world country, this is a form of engagement that we are a part of. We will stay with our families instead of going to a hotel. Persons would want to go to Trinidad for culture. And when we think of culture, there's one thing every year that persons look forward to when they visit Trinidad, and that is Carnival. But Carnival is not the only reason why persons would want to go to Trinidad. Persons would want to go to enjoy the Holly Fest or the Easter enactment. For us, we are the chief destination for reggae and related activities or dancehall related activities. In the Caribbean, we have Trinidad for jazz festival or jazz music or that sort of celebration. As I mentioned before, for leisure activities, the beaches of Tobago are reserved for leisure activities. They are well maintained to facilitate scuba diving. Persons who would just want a suntan or a sunbath, they will more so go to Scarborough or the Boca Reef of Tobago. Then we have our cruise ship passengers. Seeing that Trinidad is located in the south of the Caribbean region, most of the persons, or it is easy access for tourists who are coming from which continent again? Remember, we looked at our map earlier. Where are they coming from? That's right. They are coming from South America. Good. So when they visit via the cruise ship pier, some of them will just visit there for a couple hours. They don't stay there. So being in the south of the Caribbean, it is a route, and on that route, they will have access to Port of Spain, which is one of the main tourist destinations in Trinidad. I want you to look on my map. And my map is in colors. It highlights the northern range of Trinidad, and the northern range accounts for the highest point in Trinidad. Or all those areas that are highlighted dark green are highlands. So in these areas, they are natural reserves which provides a habitat for wildlife, unique flora and fauna that are found nowhere else. Those areas that are highlighted yellow, we don't see any on the coast of Trinidad, but we see a good stretch on the coast of Tobago, highlights beach vacation. So those persons who are interested in the traditional tourism activity, which is sunbathing or the sea, the sun, and the sand, they will more so go to Tobago. Those who will go for nature lodges or hikes, they will go to Trinidad, of course, which affords them that access. So the nature of tourism or the nature that is there in Trinidad affords persons to view unique animals, to include butterflies, to include ocelots, and I'll show you what that looks like in a little while. It will also have unique species of birds as opposed to other things that we would have had unique to our culture here in Jamaica. Yachting is a thing in Trinidad. And we know of our own yacht club along the Palisades Strip. Now in Trinidad, you have over 1,500 yachts. Or you will have sporting activities that will have yacht race. Or you may want to go on the yacht for a day or just a day at beach with your friends. That is also afforded in the Chagaramas marinas. And it is an event. It is a thing for persons or visitors of Trinidad and Tobago. So that is an image of what the ocelot looks like. It is a South American leopard. So we spoke of reasons why persons will come to the Caribbean region, and we look specifically at Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados as two different territories. At this time, we'll now look at the benefits of tourism to the Caribbean region. The tourism industry in the Caribbean, it is the most important source of foreign exchange. Foreign exchange, hint, money. So the Caribbean countries benefit significantly in terms of earning big bucks that are then used to make purchases on the global market. We also look at the benefit of labor or providing employment. So the industry affords jobs for persons who are well educated, persons who are skilled, whether they have direct contact with the tourists or they serve the tourists indirectly. Labor intensive suggests, or as was previously mentioned, that the tourist industry, it has a heavy demand on customer service. So the interaction with people is constant. It never ends. So at every point in the industry, we have someone that is making an offer, who is accommodating the tourists right throughout their experience. We look at the benefit of profits. Profits are earned from taxes that are put on flights, or departure taxes, or when they buy their airline ticket, they would have to pay taxes, or when they make purchases on the local market, they're going to the supermarket to grab a water, taxes are on those items as well. These profits are used for the maintenance of the facilities that are in and around the tourist resort towns and the tourist areas. So the money is used to fix road. You ever see a pothole in a road that leads to a tourist resort area? Think about it. Do you ever hear of a blackout in a hotel? Think about it. So the money that is generated, or the profits that are earned from the taxes that tourists will have to pay, is used for the maintenance of ports, the maintenance of the roads that lead into and are around the tourist resort towns, and they also use to cover the expenses of social services that are afforded by the government. We're still on the benefits. The tourism industry, it is an economic linkages. I've been speaking about this from earlier on. A linkage means that it provides support for smaller business. So these small business, they provide support for the industry, and they are supported by the industry. Think about our farmers. Hotels need food to give their guests. There's no way you can accommodate your guests and you don't offer them at least water. So in this sense, the hotels are affording, or especially those that are giving all-inclusive packages, tourists are guaranteed something to eat. And if you don't mind, they eat right around the clock. With that being said, some of the fruits and vegetables that are afforded to them are from our local farmers. We'll continue to this after the break. That's all the time we have for today. If you have any questions, send them to Television Jamaica Facebook page at Television Jamaica, or Instagram at television_Jamaica, or use the hashtag TVJClassTime. And we'll ensure that our answers give you a leg up for the next class. We switch gears to Cape Economics that comes up after the break.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Hello, CAPE students. I'm Shanique Francis. This is Economics for Grade 12, and we will be looking into the theory of consumer demand. Let's get right to it. Now, for today's lesson, our objectives include to explain the concept of utility, the law of diminishing marginal utility. We will be looking at explaining equilibrium using the marginal utility approach. We will derive the demand curve using the marginal utility approach, differentiate between different types of goods, and we will look at the demand curve. What is the demand curve, the shifts of the demand curve, as well as the movements along the demand curve. Now, first of all, you would have been introduced in your first lesson for this term to the concept of demand, which is very basic to economics. So demand, generally speaking, can look at desired demand or effective demand. Desired demand is when you want something and you don't necessarily have the means to acquire it. However, there is effective demand, which looks at the willingness and ability of the consumer to obtain goods at various price levels. There is also the concept of market demand. While demand looks at individual consumers, market demand looks at the sum of all individual demand in a market. So it looks at my demand for patties, your demand for patties, your friend's demand for patties. All of our individual demands together will constitute or make up the market demand for patties. Now, the law of demand states that, holding all other things constant, there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. It simply means that when price is moving in one direction, quantity demanded is moving in the opposite direction. Hence the term, inverse or indirect or even negative relationship. So if the price of a good is increasing, generally what happens is that the quantity demanded for that good decreases. So the more expensive something gets, even if it's your favorite food item or your favorite toy, when the price goes up, you tend to purchase less of the good, and that is especially in the case of a normal good. And I'll explain that normal good part a little bit later. Now, the fact that the price can cause the quantity demanded of a good to change, and please remember I said price causes a change in quantity demanded. That is very significant, because when we get to the demand curve, we'll notice that price changes cause a movement along the demand curve, but there are other factors that are considered to be non-price factors which have an impact or influence on demand. Now, these factors vary, and you might know more than I'm showing you or than we'll discuss today, but there are several factors that influence demand, and I'll just look at a few. So, one factor which influences a consumer's demand is their income. Think about it. The more lunch money you get to go to school, it means that you can afford to purchase more things at your tuck shop or your canteen. So when your income increases, it puts you in a position to purchase more goods or services. The opposite is also true. When your income decreases, generally speaking, you have the tendency to purchase less goods because you're not as rich or as well off as you were before, so you have to cut back on the things that you are purchasing. And that's just one factor. There are other factors which influence demand, such as changes in the price of related goods. What do we mean by related goods? Now, related goods could be substitutes or complements. And substitutes are goods that are used in place of other goods. So a popular substitute that we might know is butter and margarine. If you usually purchase butter and you realize that the price has been increasing, you'll purchase less butter and more margarine. Or if you usually purchase butter and you realize that margarine is getting very cheap, you switch and say, okay, let me purchase a cheaper good. So the price of that related good could contribute to your change in demand for butter. And then there are complements. Complements are goods that go well together. So when you think about your lunch at school, what two things do you generally purchase together? Are you a patty and cocoa bread person or bun and cheese person? Now, those are examples of complements. So usually if, for example, the price of cocoa bread is increasing and you usually like to have your patty with cocoa bread, but you realize that, okay, cocoa bread is getting too expensive, so you're just not going to buy any more patties. So your demand for patty will decrease based on the fact that the price of the complementary good has changed. There is also another factor which influences demand, which is known as expectations. Now, your expectations today can affect your behavior today. So what if today you expect that the price of bun and cheese will increase tomorrow? Maybe you'll purchase more bun and cheese today so that it will cost you less in the future. You don't have to pay that higher price. And also, you could expect the price of a good to fall. Maybe you're expecting a store to have a Black Friday sale or some other kind of sale. So instead of purchasing the item that you want today, you make a decision to wait until the item goes on sale and then you purchase it. Now, that would cause demand to be lower today because you expect it to change in the future. There are other factors which influence demand, such as taste and preference. You know, there might just be a new trend and you decide to try another good or service, and so that would impact the level of demand. And there's also advertisements which play a very critical role. You see an advertisement for, you know, a new resort on social media, or maybe you get an email and you say, hey, since they're having this deal, or since this resort looks so good, let me go and try. Now, without the advertisement, you might not have made that demand, and it's also there for good. So it's not just, you know, that type of service, but maybe you see some sort of food on the TV, looks appealing, you say, hey, let me try it. Maybe if you didn't see the advertisement, you would not have bought it. So I mentioned earlier that demand looks at the willingness and ability to purchase goods at certain prices. And I also referenced the demand curve, which, based on the law of demand, is a downward sloping curve. Now, to construct your demand curve, you will need a demand schedule, which consists of different quantities of goods that are purchased at different price levels. So, in this example, you are seeing my demand schedule. You're seeing the quantities of good which varies, and I'm going to start from the lowest quantity, and I'm going to go up. So the quantity demanded ranges from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And the prices in that same order ranges from $40 to $35 to $30 to $25 and also $20. What you're noticing is that as the price increases, the quantity demanded tends to decrease. And at lower prices, more goods are demanded. Now, this is why your demand curve will slope downwards. Notice that when the price of the good is $40, 10 units are demanded, and as the price decreases, the quantities demanded tend to increase. And as I mentioned before, this is generally what happens when you have a normal good. Now, the movement along the demand curve is what you just saw in the graph, right? So when there is a change in price, we are noticing that the quantity demanded, it moves along that same demand curve. There are different points along the curve that consumers will demand based on price changes. So price causes a change in quantity demanded. Remember, price causes a change in quantity demanded. And I'm emphasizing this because there are always some little tricky questions on your exam that ask you about the demand curve and what causes a change in demand. But a change in demand is not caused by a change in price. A change in quantity demanded is caused by a change in price. Demand changes when there is a change in a non-price factor, such as income, the ones I mentioned before. So, again, the change in demand is influenced by a non-price factor. When income changes, when there is a change in the expectation of future prices, and also when you look at the price of related goods, when you consider advertisements, those are things that causes the quantity demanded to change at each price level, and so we say that there is a change in demand. The difference is that the change in price will cause a movement along the demand curve, while a change in a non-price factor which influences demand causes the demand curve to shift altogether, such that we have a new demand curve. In this example, you are seeing where the initial demand curve is D and the new demand curve is D1. So we're noticing that the demand curve shifts inwards to the left. Now, what would cause a leftward shift of a demand curve? A leftward shift of a demand curve is caused by any non-price factor which causes demand to be lower at all given prices. So if it means that the consumer earns less income, and so at each price level they are able to afford lower quantities of that good, then that's what happens. The demand curve would shift left. Now, if there are other non-price factors that causes demand to be lower, then this would cause a leftward shift of the demand curve. So since you know what would cause a leftward shift of the demand curve, what would cause a rightward shift of your demand curve? Is it price? Right. So the rightward shift of your demand curve will be caused by also a change in the non-price factor which causes demand to increase. Now we're going to look at the types of goods. So I mentioned earlier that there are different types of goods. And in this example, I'm just going to look at three popular types of goods. They are normal goods, inferior goods, and giffen goods. Normal goods, inferior goods, and giffen goods. And if you were listening carefully, you would have heard me mention the normal goods specifically. So what is a normal good in economic sense? Now, when we're talking about a normal good, it's really a good that is described by its relationship between price and income. Let me explain. Now, for a normal good, whenever the price increases, there is a tendency for the quantity demanded to decrease. Hence, the law of demand and the downward sloping demand curve. When price increases, the quantity demanded of that good decreases. Now, there's also a relationship between, the normal good and income. For a normal good, if your income increases, what do you think you have the tendency to do? Once you consider this to be a normal good, if your income does increase, you're going to purchase more of that good. So that's how the normal good works. So remember, for the normal good, price increases, quantity demanded decreases, and when income increases, you purchase more, or if income decreases, you purchase less. Now, there's also the inferior good. When we think of something that is inferior, we're thinking, inferior is not a good quality, right? Nobody wants to be inferior. No one wants anything inferior. You don't want any inferior experiences. You want the best of the best. So an inferior good then is a good that basically you are consuming because you don't have a choice. So the inferior good is described by its relationship with income. Now, if I said before that the inferior good is basically one that you use because you don't have a choice, it means then that the consumer who experiences an increase in their income is likely to purchase less of the inferior good. So you used to get $500 for your lunch money. Then your parents say, hey, I'm going to give you $1,000 now. Now that you start getting a little bit of money, you say, all right, I'm not going to buy this good anymore. Maybe when you used to get the little bit of money, the $500, you used to purchase bun and cheese. But now that you're getting enough money, you're getting $1,000 per day, you decide that, hey, bun and cheese is not going to cut it for me anymore. I need to order some, ackee and saltfish and fried dumpling and barbecue chicken and fried chicken and everything. Because you were only purchasing bun and cheese simply because you didn't have enough money. So for you, that's an inferior good. For someone else, that inferior good could be what you consider to be inferior, could be a normal good because maybe that's what they'll switch to purchasing when they have more money. Then there's also the giffen good. Giffen good. Now, the giffen good is a special type of inferior good where when the price increases, that's when people start to purchase more. usually a good example of a situation like that is, say for instance, you have a famine in a region and food is scarce and so prices are high and people generally purchase, rice, potato, different goods. But they purchase those along with meat. What might be happening is that meat is something that they usually purchase. They normally purchase potatoes too. And I'm using the potatoes as the example of the given good. But the price of meat has gone up and the price of potato also goes up. But the price of meat goes up so much that you decide that instead of, preparing potatoes and meat for dinner or breakfast or whatever meal, you decide that you're just going to purchase more potatoes because even though the price has increased, the price of the other good you usually purchase has increased so much that you can't afford it either. And so you purchase more potatoes when the price increases. So it's a special type of inferior good. So that was a lot. And let me just break you a little bit so that I can ask some questions. And I want to also tell you to run for your pens, your pencils, your calculators for the next half of the lesson. If you're just joining us, you can do that. All right, so question. Can you explain 2 factors which would cause the demand curve to shift? I think I mentioned about 6 factors. And also, as it relates to the demand curve, what is the difference between a change in demand and a change in quantity demanded? All right, so maybe you're answering. Now, if you mention 2 factors which would cause the demand curve to shift and there are non-price factors, if you never say price, you're right. So if you said something like income or advertising or change in taste and preferences, you are correct. Those factors would cause the demand curve to shift. Now, what is the difference between the change in demand and the change in quantity demanded? If you said that the change in demand refers to a shift of the demand curve, then you are also correct. And if you said that the change in quantity demanded means that there has been a change in price and a movement along the demand curve, then you're also correct. So well done. Now, our topic, just to remind you, is the theory of consumer demand. And we know that in economics, they try to make assumptions, they try to understand human behavior, and that's why they refer to economics as a social science. They want to know what causes people to make the decisions that they make. And so they make assumptions, they come up with theories that they use to study behavior and make decisions on a larger scale at the macroeconomic level. Now, one theory that is used in microeconomics is the marginal utility theory. It's also referred to as the cardinalist approach. Now, based on the cardinalist approach, they believe, because I don't believe this, but they believe it, they believe that consumers make their decisions about what to purchase based on the satisfaction that they gain from the good or service. Now, the interesting part of this is how they believe consumers measure the satisfaction, and they believe that consumers assign a numeric value to measure the satisfaction that they get from each good, right? So in making a decision about what good to purchase, the consumers are looking at, which, if you're looking at 2 goods, say you're looking at pineapples and bananas, the consumer is not looking to see, okay, this is bigger than this, let me purchase the pineapples or the bananas. No, the theory says that consumers assign a numeric value in terms of satisfaction to those goods to say, okay, the pineapple will give me, 50 U-tails and the banana will give me 100 U-tails. Since the banana is more satisfying, let me purchase the banana. That's what the theory says. That's not me. Now, we want to look at some key terms before we get into the marginalist or cardinalist theory as it relates to utility. Now, one key term is a rational consumer. And a rational consumer is one who looks at the costs and benefits and disadvantages of consuming additional units of a good. That's what they say a rational consumer is. There is also the concept of total utility. And the utility there is making reference to satisfaction. So total utility looks at the total satisfaction that you get from consuming a good or a service. So the total utility will include all the different satisfactions you get per unit, sum them up, and that will be your total utility. Then there is marginal utility. And marginal is a term that you'll hear more and more as you go on throughout economics. So marginal always looks at what happens when there is a change in terms of one unit. The marginal utility now is the extra satisfaction you get from consuming one more unit of a good. That's marginal utility. And the utils is the imaginary measure of satisfaction. So the marginal utility is based on utils. So for instance, they might say you get 10 utils from consuming a good, and that 10 utils represents the level of satisfaction you would receive from consuming the good. There is the principle of diminishing marginal utility. And again, you'll hear diminishing this and diminishing that in economics more. So diminishing marginal utility now is a theory or a concept which basically says, as you continue to consume more units of a good, each successive unit you consume will give you less satisfaction than the previous unit. So the first time you try a banana in your life, you know, you decide you're gonna try a banana for the first time. It is amazing. Oh my gosh, you've never tasted anything like this. How come I never discovered this fruit before? It's everything for you. And you think to yourself, I want to eat bananas every day. It's so good. But the truth is, as you continue to eat more bananas, you get less and less satisfaction. The experience doesn't feel as great as it did the first time. That's what the theory or the concept of diminishing marginal utility explains. Now, we want to look at what a rational consumer might do. And the rational consumer is one who aims to maximize utility. So I want you to look at this statement and see if you can fill in the blanks. It says, when consumers make choices about the quantity of goods and services to consume, the assumed objective is to maximize total utility, get as much as you can get, right? The consumer faces a number of constraints, the most important of which are the consumer's dash and the dash of the goods and services they wish to consume. I wonder if you are able to fill in those blanks. So think about it. You want to have as much satisfaction as possible, right? And you get the satisfaction from purchasing goods or using services. What are your limitations when you think about, okay, I'm going to buy this today? What do you think about, right? One of the first things you might say is you look at the price. And then you might think, okay, how much money do I have? So the first blank line there, it says the most important of which are the consumer's income. That's the first space. And the price of the goods. So you are restricted in terms of how much you can do because you have a little bit of money. You can't just spend and, infinite sum of money. You are constrained by your income. Another term we want to look at is the consumer equilibrium. And this permits the consumer to get the most satisfaction possible from your income, right? We'll look a little bit more on that. So when we think of a consumer who is purchasing a single good, we say that the consumer, if they're only consuming one good, they are in equilibrium when MU, or marginal utility, derived from the last unit consumed is equal to the price paid by the consumer. So when the MU from the last unit of good you use is equal to the price, you're in equilibrium. Now, what if the consumer is consuming multiple goods? Because we know we don't just consume one good per day. And sometimes, even if you think about what you eat, you want to eat something, you want to have a beverage. Now, when we consider a multiple good framework, the consumer is in equilibrium when the marginal utility for the last dollar they spend on one good or the first good, the marginal utility, the ratio of marginal utility to price based on the last dollar spent on one good or the first good is also equal to the ratio of the marginal utility to price of the second good. So the marginal utility in this example of good X divided by good X should be equal to the marginal utility of good Y divided by the price of good Y. What does that mean? It simply means the consumer will consume both goods to a point where they are indifferent. They get the same level of satisfaction from both. Now we want to look at this table, which is showing you total utility and marginal utility. And we are saying that the goods that we're focusing on are snow mints. And in the table, it has 3 columns and several rows. That's about 2, 4, 6, 8. It's 8 rows. So the first, we're looking at the number of snow mints. So it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the total utilities related to those different numbers I mentioned are 0, 7, 11, 13, 14, 14, and then 13. The marginal utility, the first space is blank because you get no utility if you consume nothing. And then it's 7, 4, 2, 1, 0, and -1. What we're seeing in this table is that as the consumer consumes more of the good, the total utility is increasing. And we notice that the marginal utility is decreasing. Now, the marginal utility decreases because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. As you consume more snow mints, you get less satisfaction from each successive unit. However, we notice that the total utility increases up to a point. The total utility will decrease when the marginal utility becomes negative. How does this work? How do you get negative satisfaction? If you're consuming a good and as you continue to consume more units of the good, you get less and less satisfaction. You can consume the good up to a point where you're sick of the good, you're disgusted, it's like, I don't even want this. So you reach a point where you're dissatisfied, and that's where the negative marginal utility comes in. So because the marginal utility decreases as you consume additional units, you'll notice that the total utility increases, yes, up to a point, and as it increases, it's increasing at a decreasing rate. At first, it moves from 7 to 11, then from 11 to 13. We notice the gap gets smaller and smaller each time until it starts to decrease when the marginal utility becomes negative. Now, if you should use the data that was just showed to you to plot your total utility curve and your marginal utility curve, this is what it would look like. You'll notice the total utility curve increases sharply initially. That's when the marginal utility is at its highest. And then the curve gets a little flat because marginal utility, the law of diminishing marginal utility sets in, and MU is decreasing. And then we notice the total utility curve dips, and that's what happens when MU becomes negative. Now, this is one of the conditions we mentioned earlier about the consumer maximizing utility. And there are 2 conditions for utility maximization. The first one, this one I mentioned earlier, it's also referred to the equimarginal principle. And it's where the marginal utility divided by the price of one good is equal to the marginal utility divided by the price of the other good. And I did say earlier that what it means is that the consumer, when making the decision between 2 goods to make a purchase, they're going to consume the good to a point in which they are indifferent. So initially, if you have 2 goods, the consumer is going to purchase the good. Their first purchase will be the good that gives them more satisfaction. Now, because there is a law of diminishing marginal utility, if you focus on purchasing one good, eventually you'll get less and less satisfaction. When the satisfaction of that good that you prefer starts to decline, you'll notice that the other good, because you haven't purchased any units of it, it will have a higher level of marginal utility or satisfaction, and so you'll make the decision to start purchasing the other good. So eventually you get to a point where you're indifferent. It doesn't matter which good you're purchasing because the satisfaction gained from both will eventually be equal. Now, if you think about it, what I just said, to prove that this condition is real, as I mentioned, if you are purchasing apples and bananas, you have the option to purchase 2 goods. Right? Initially, you start to purchase the apples because, okay, apples are more satisfying. You have a higher level of utils. Eventually, you get to a point where the utils for apples starts to fall. And so you switch to purchasing bananas. And then when you switch to purchasing bananas, the marginal utility for that will start to fall also. And eventually, you get to a point where you are indifferent between the two. It doesn't matter which of the two you purchase. Now, there is another condition for utility maximization, and this is that the consumer must spend all of their income. This means that the price times quantity of one good plus the price times the quantity of the other good should be equal to I, or income. Now, if the consumer has money left over when they have purchased, a certain quantity of both goods, it means that the price times quantity of one good plus the price times quantity of the other good is less than income. And that means that the consumer is not being rational. They're not maximizing their satisfaction. And to maximize satisfaction, you must consume both goods until you're indifferent. That's one condition. And also, you must spend all of your income. If you have more money, how can you be fully satisfied? When you have more money, it's a signal, it's a suggestion. It means that you are able to purchase more goods and get more satisfaction. So these are the two conditions of utility maximization. Now, this is where you need your pen, your pencil, a calculator, a marker, a crayon, whatever you use to write, right? And also your critical thinking skills. We want to look at the example where a consumer is choosing between two goods and there are different levels of marginal utility. Now, in this table, there are quantities of the first good. We'll call the first good A. And we have 4 columns where we're looking at the quantities and marginal utilities for both goods. For good A, we have the first, second, third, and fourth units. That's in the first column. In the second column, we have the marginal utility of good A, which is 7, 5, 3, and 1. In the third column, we have the second good, which is good B, and we have the quantities being the first, second, third, and fourth. Now, we're going to take a quick break and come back. Please keep this in mind.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
All right, so welcome back. And we are looking at the theory of consumer demand. Now, I just showed you a table looking at the marginal utilities of two goods. And what I want you to look at is quickly how I will show you the pattern of spending for the consumer. Now, based on this question, it says that the consumer has the option of purchasing two goods. Each good costs $1 each, and you want to know the combinations that the consumer will choose based on the satisfaction. Now, looking at this table, the consumer's choice will be first to purchase the first unit of good B because it has greater utils than the first unit of good A. The consumer's budget is $5, by the way. So the consumer purchases good B, and then they're going to compare the first unit of good A and good B. The second largest utils is good A. So the consumer will purchase A, then B again, then both A and B simultaneously because the utils is the same for both goods. I want you for your assignment now to calculate the total utils based on those goods and also to see if the consumer was maximizing their income. I also want to mention that when you have a situation where the prices are different, you will look at the marginal utility per dollar of both goods. In this example, you're seeing two goods. The price of one good is $2 and the price of the other good is $4, and you have the marginal utility. Your first step will be to calculate the marginal utility per dollar and then make the comparison. Now, we've done quite a bit today and we want to recap very quickly, and I hope you were paying attention. So I have a few questions for you, and I will not give you the answers to all of the questions because I want you to find some on your own. So I'll be moving through some of the questions. The first question is which best expresses the law of diminishing marginal utility. And if you scan through the responses, I would say that which is the best one, right? Look at that. I'll give you an answer for one of them. The second question says the total utility of a product is calculated by, and the response there is the third one, and it is the summing of the marginal utilities for each successive units. And I gave away this answer already. This is another question for you to look at. Which situation is consistent with the law of diminishing marginal return? Have you figured it out as yet? I hope you're writing these down. So that's all we have time for today on the theory of consumer demand. It was my pleasure being here. So please take the opportunity to send questions to us on the various platforms. And I guarantee you 100% you will benefit even more from this lesson and also the other lessons. Now, for a repeat of all three sessions, make sure you tune in later today on JNN at 4 p.m. Or you can always subscribe to onespotmedia.com to catch up on all that you've missed. Make absolute certain that you join us again tomorrow for more CSEC and CAPE classes. Until then, stay safe.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.